Welcome back, everybody. Today we're discussing Loki episode 2.
Where all the good men gone and
Free, my horn friends, be free!
And I could also set fire to the palace.
No, just stop. Don't set fire to the palace.
This episode continued the mystery of the variant all the way until both their identity and the first phase of their plan was revealed. We learned that this is female Loki, or Lady Loki, and she was stealing all of the reset charges to cause utter chaos.
That is not nice.
Now, this episode revealed a ton of new information and only fueled the fire behind basically every theory that I discussed in episode 1. I still believe that the timeline is cyclical. I still believe the timekeepers are not the righteous protectors of this universe. And I think that if we don't have some Loki on Loki action by the end of this, Disney Plus is going to notice a crisp $8 missing from their bank accounts each month. Look at these two people. The episode details Lady Loki once again stealing charges, the variant Loki trying to manipulate the timeline manipulators, and finally, character progression as the true chaotic neutral Loki is actually helping them to find Lady Loki with his genius, only to escape the TVA once the opportunity presents itself. True chaos. I love it. Honestly, the chaos is perfect for who this character is, and it makes the series so fun and light while still dealing with a universal threat on the largest of scales. It felt like episode 2 marked the end of Act 1, and if we had to pick out of the cast who the bad guys will be by the end of Act 3, I'm still believing the timekeepers are not the ones that we can trust here. Well, with a little bit of an asterisk there. This episode had one of my favorite theory crafting moments ever, and if you watched last week's breakdown where I talked about the implications of the timekeepers' plan and how they are technically removing free will from the equation, you should know just how giddy I was when they started talking about it in the library and basically word for word what we discussed last week. This is Loki figuring out that they aren't doing what is morally right. They are doing what is right for them. This is the villain of the Avengers figuring out that there is a bigger fish to fry, and these tiny interactions and these conversations are the building blocks to the reveal that, boom, the timekeepers are these baddies. Now, let's talk about that asterisk. I think the timekeepers, like all authoritative utilitarian governments, will be able to justify their actions and their continued existence when the other shoe drops and finally Loki gets to talk to them. So my theory still details a cyclical plot where the timekeepers are using what they know and what they have to remain in power, avoiding the end of everything that has ever existed because of some fabled reason. So what is that reason? Well, when we saw the timeline split this episode, it occurred to me there could theoretically be more than one set of timekeepers. Imagine if what these timekeepers were doing were pruning the other realities so that the timekeepers of those other realities couldn't then take over the mantle and make their reality the sacred timeline. It would be very meta, and I think the biggest thing that would discredit that theory is the little note in episode 1 that says, time works differently around here. The timekeepers are likely what the comics would consider nexus beings. These are beings that exist in the same form across the entire multiverse, and there could only ever be one of them each because they are so powerful. This idea also came up during WandaVision because Wanda is one of those beings in the comics, but my heart isn't sold on this idea, though I think it would be pretty wild if this was actually timekeepers fighting other timekeepers for control of the sacred timeline. Again, I think that would be pretty interesting, but ultimately, what is the big bad or big event that they can't overcome that they have somehow justified removing sentient free will from an entire universe? Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? And I think as long as we're considering this Nexus level threat, we're on the right track. Entities such as Kang the Conqueror or even Galactus could be what they're trying to prevent. And that would mean that if Loki and team are successful and they do defeat the Timekeepers and allow the multiverse to exist, they would be unleashing a giant threat to all living beings in the multiverse. But of course, it would kind of be better because then the multiverse and free will would have a chance to overcome this giant threat. I think, in my opinion, that would be a great frickin' plot for Loki to deal with because the moral implications of everything would just be so perfectly traversed by this true chaotic god. Yeah, and I would personally love that. Also, in the library, I want to discuss the sections that were classified to Loki. He asked 3 questions.
I'd like all files pertaining to the creation of the TVA. Okay, I'd like all files pertaining to the beginning of time then.
Those are classified.
Okay, the end of time.
Those are classified.
Okay, what files can I have?
Now, I think these are the most important questions that Loki could ask, but I also think they're the most important questions that we could ask. I think the inclusion of the creation, start, and ending point of all time, I think they're the same thing. I think the creation of the timekeepers and the starting of the universe and the ending of the universe are all technically the same thing. That's why they were all classified. Not because, he's, not able to reach so much information, but because that information is the same information. It's the cyclical timeline that I believe exists. We see their hands leading to the creation of this timeline, which happens right after they emerge victorious from a great multiverse war. And the ending, well, it's something that theoretically could be shown because it's something that they have already planned out. I think with each cycle they improve, reducing the number of variations until it is an exact science. The next cycle will probably be adjusted so that the variation of Loki that we see now never comes to exist. They could accomplish this in any number of ways, like make the Hulk fit into the elevator this time, or perhaps have Tony safely pass the door before he exits. Both would be tiny adjustments that ultimately would remove this variation from ever being created. It can be a little paradoxical when you think about it, because the sacred timeline is the one where Tony loses the stone and has to go back and meet his dad. But ultimately, the same outcome occurs either way. It's the exact same logic when Lady Loki hides in the timeline. As long as the same outcome is created and the water destroys the salad, it really doesn't matter what happens moments before, nor the amount of salt that you add to it. That's the power they have as masters of the universe, and I think that really highlights how smart Loki is compared to them. Now, here is where my theories get a little less sturdy. I think Mobius is purposefully named Mobius because of the Mobius strip, which is this infinite loop which aligns with the cyclical timeline theory, and we have seen a Mobius strip before when the Avengers were discovering time travel. This character must have been named this for a reason, and the only thing that I'm certain of is that this name was chosen to show how important he is to the sacred timeline. It really feels like he is the timeline, or is critical to its integrity. Something that also came to mind this episode is how they kind of have three branches of government. The executive, which is represented by the TVA or the agents and Mobius, the judicial, which is represented by the judge here, and the legislative, which is represented by the timekeepers making the rules of this realm and the timeline. The fact that it can be broken down so easily into three makes me wonder if Mobius and the judge here are somehow closer linked to the timekeepers than anyone else at the TVA. They could perhaps be vessels for them. Hell, they could perhaps even be them, or some other kind of odd entanglement. I'm just waiting for a third really important TVA agent to appear, and I'm sure that you'll see me on Twitter saying that Owen Wilson was a timekeeper all along. He may not be. Again, this is something that I'm still exploring, but this line here is what stemmed this entire train of thought.
I don't know, because I've never met him, thankfully. Although I shouldn't say that. That one looks like he's got kind of...
This just feels more intimate than I think it should for, mere agents of the Time Variance Authority serving these three great space lizards. I'm not sure, though. The last bit that I want to talk about is the bombing. I don't know why I made that noise. We've seen larger channels put out entire videos explaining this exact point, because fucking give me those views, baby. And I didn't watch them because the answer was always really obvious to me. It's chaos, right? It doesn't need to have rhyme or reason. I don't think it's worth analyzing these dates for, because that's the part of her plan to create chaos as a way to remain hidden. The more interesting thing to me, however, is what this chaos can blossom to. This chaos already, right now, as we've seen, creates a shortage of agents as everyone escapes into the timeline and away from the TVA headquarters. I'm not exactly sold that that's where she's heading because her powers wouldn't work there, but they could be doing this to get intel, possibly access some of those classified files that Loki wanted to learn about in this episode as well, which ultimately would be the reason why the showrunners included him failing so hard for this information in this episode and it ending with them walking through that mystery portal. I think cinematically, it would make a whole lot of sense to have them entering the library at the start of episode 3. But with that, we come to the end of the episode. If you have additional questions about the episode or anything that I left out, please comment below and I will make it my life's mission researching, documenting each of them for episode 2 of Loki, a Disney Plus show created by Disney and Marvel Studios. Special thank you to all of my wonderful patrons, including this month's highest tier donor, Michael Linck. Much love, everybody, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon.